Welcome to the Software People Stories. I'm Shiv.
I'm Chitra.
And I'm Gayatri.
We bring you interesting, untold stories of people
Associated with the creation
or consumption of software-based solutions.
You'll hear stories of what worked,
and sometimes what didn't,
you will also hear very personal experiences.
and insights that would trigger your thoughts
and inspire you to do even greater things.
Before we jump into today's conversation, a special thanks to PM Power Consulting for encouraging and supporting this show right from the start. With over 1,000 person-years of collective experience, PM Power has helped many organizations, teams, and individuals chart out their own journeys of excellence and make progress. Thank you, PM Power. Now, let's move to today's episode. In this episode of the Software People Stories, my guest Ben Wilcox is the Chief Technology Officer and Chief Information Security Officer at ProArch. Ben shares his fascinating journey from building a web hosting business as a teenager to his current role as CTO and CISO at ProArch. Ben discusses the evolution of his career, his involvement in various projects, the ever-changing landscape of security, especially with the advent of AI. He also provides valuable insights into how enterprises should approach security, the complexities of data localization, and the importance of a continuous security model. The conversation also delves into career advice for aspiring IT and security professionals. Listen on. Hi, Ben. Welcome to the Software People Stories.
Thank you, Shiv, for having me on here. I'm really excited for today's meeting.
Yeah, I'm doubly excited because you're the second person from ProArch who's on the show. We had Santosh earlier, and that was a very interesting conversation. And some of the things that you do, we couldn't really get into that because his story was also very fascinating. So we will start with your origin story, how you got to be associated with IT, what things that you've been doing, and then we'll kind of take it from there.
Sure. So my history goes back probably about 25 years or so. I started as a teenager in the early web days, and I built a link list.
Okay.
I don't know if you remember like the early 90s, but there was no Google, there was nothing like that, right? You couldn't really search for stuff. The most popular site was Yahoo, and it was just a list of like all the different links that you could go to. Well, I built my own based off of the things that I found really cool. And it got so popular that I got kicked off my local ISP. And like these, right, they have a small, line there and, like a single server running it all at that point. And so I, with a friend, I built my own server. Another friend knew Linux really well. And we found a place to basically host it. Like a co-location center, and I started, having it on there, and I was able to generate some income off of it by using banners and other things. Well, I quickly found out that other people were having similar problems, and I could make a web hosting business essentially. So as a teenager, I had a web hosting business with some friends, and that grew and grew, and I operated that through the early 2000s when kind of the .NET boom and crash happened, and telcos got really funny, and it was time to kind of go do some other things. I then got exposure as someone who got to build a lot of things at college. I basically helped them kind of implement a lot of Microsoft technology and redo it after a data center mishap where everything overheated, and I spent about 2 years helping them rebuild Active Directory, Exchange, SharePoint, all these other types of infrastructure there. And then I kind of got into a routine of a lot of maintenance, and I'm not someone who likes to just maintain things. I like to build, I like to do new stuff, kind of explore on that. So I took a totally different direction, and I went into software development for 3 years. And in that time, I learned a lot of things about building products and project management and how to work with developers and we were doing a lot of cutting edge stuff with Adobe Flash in that time, right? So there wasn't a lot of good front end systems. Flash allowed us to build kind of some ERPs, business products, CRMs, and other things that were very customized. The problem with trying to make one-off solutions is you have to have pretty good customers that can envision those future states. And for the industries that we were targeting, it was a really tough ask because we were focused a lot on manufacturing. I spent about 3 years there, and then I kind of got this itch to go back to the system integrator side and start building things. And that's when I actually joined a company called Visor Group, became IV4, and eventually got acquired by ProArch in 2020. And in that time, I got to do a lot of really cool things, like be one of the first people to help move Lotus Notes to Microsoft Exchange Online. I got to play with all of the online stuff very early, and that was a big shift, right? Coming from someone who's building servers and other things to building cloud solutions. And I've spent my time now at ProArch. I've had probably about 12 different roles. All of them kind of, it's like I said, I like shiny things. I've had lots of different things in there from, and focus areas. I've been, a lot in SharePoint. I've done a lot in SQL. I was in VMware for a while. I was over in all of the Microsoft side of things. And today, my responsibilities as CTO and CISO are kind of across the board, and I do get to play with lots of different stuff today too. So lots of things on AI, security, data, and apps that we build to help customers put this all together.
Wonderful. So going back to your teenage days, and when you said that you also had a web hosting business, how did you take to running a business compared to maybe setting up a server and then having someone on there?
That was really hard as a teenager. You have like no concepts around it. My parents were not entrepreneurs. They always encouraged me to like try to earn my own money and do my own things, and they're very supportive on that. But they don't. There's I guess a little bit like my family comes from a history of my mom's a teacher, my dad's a pharmacist, and like as a pharmacist, like he would run the store and stuff like that. So like I grew up like behind the pharmacy counter and like learning to count pills and operating the cash register and stuff like that. But the business side of it was not good. I remember the first time I had to go file taxes, and I think I was 15 or something like that. And remember, in the U.S. to get a business at this point, like I needed my parents to actually sign something. At 15, I have no like legal authority or anything else. So I convinced my parents to help start this for me and be the signer. And I remember going to the accountant at the end of the year, and like all I had was like a bunch of like receipts in a bag. It was all crumpled up, right? It was like, this is the receipts. Like I was told like, hey, you need to save your receipts. So I had all my receipts. They were just all crumpled up though, right? They were in my pockets or like things that got shipped. And, I had a handwritten list of like my income there and, and my printouts of my bank account and stuff like that. And like, that's what we didn't know. So everything was constantly being learning, right? And I quickly learned, and luckily the accountant was a family friend. Right? He kind of coached me a little bit on that next one. We were a little bit more prepared on that front, but that was a little challenging at first. And then the other things I think that you really don't know as a teenager is how to whether it's a lack of emotional intelligence at that point to be able to operate as partners. That was very, very hard. That first partnership, we didn't really stay together completely on everything, and that was super challenging.
So after running your own little enterprise, how was it working in a larger company or with a bigger team?
Really enjoyed it. I liked the camaraderie. I liked the fact that I was able to learn a whole lot of new things, and there were some really good experts there that I could learn from. Right, coming into I'd say my like ability to understand like what Windows and Microsoft did in the enterprise in like 2001 and 2002 was pretty minimal. Like I had exposure to Windows servers before that, but I didn't know a lot of the other stuff. But what I did have was a drive to learn those things. So I spent a lot of time on my own personal experience trying to learn on that, on my own hardware, and also like listening, right? The CIO there was quite exceptional at teaching, and I was able to pick up a lot of things and gain his trust. And next thing you know, I was building a lot more and doing a lot more with those migrations, and it really kind of set me up nicely to be at the role here at ProArch, which is learning how to implement, how to migrate, how to do all those things in a really structured manner, with good planning, so you can be successful, right? Plan for the 95%. And then, right, you always gotta be able to improvise for that other 5%.
So when or how did this interest or shift to being a CISO happen?
That happened roughly around 2011. I started. I was the first employee when we started building a consulting practice on that was fully dedicated to that side. And my mentor, and I have the pleasure of having worked with him for 15 years. He still works with us. He comes from a deep security background, and like IT space, and it really helped me kind of understand going into businesses what the business reasons were that we were doing technology. And because of his security background, we were able to align that to security. Basically, every single consulting project we did, we talked about security. We talked about how that aligned to the business outcomes, right? Build that business justification. And then from there, being able to really think about, if you were to be ongoing managing this, right? How do you make sure that you have the right security controls going forward? That also led us into doing a lot more just very security specific projects, assessments and stuff like that. So I kind of got the lay of the land of looking at, like, in everyone's bedroom, right? How dirty is it, right? Where's all of the secrets here? And it was really challenging to in those, go back 15 years ago. We all had these annual security assessments that the businesses would do, and out of that you get this laundry list of like 500 terrible things that your business is, and everyone would be like, how am I compared to everyone else? Because we just begin delivering bad news after bad news, and like quickly realized in that these point in time assessments, you come back the next year and like very few of them actually would be fixed, right? People would get inundated with this thought process of, I have so many things here, right? Like there's not, and other priorities bubble up, and people would forget about it, and necessarily wouldn't be fixed. And eventually it became, we realized after probably about 2-3 years that we really need to get into this continuous security side of things, because no one was really doing that at that point. Instead of giving you a one-time vulnerability assessment, let's go start doing it like, continuously, right? Can we give it to you every week? Can we give it to you every day, right? Let's prioritize that. And that way, we don't just constantly make you look terrible all the time, right? You can kind of highlight how well you've been remediating this versus, this point in time, which frankly, every year the vulnerabilities get worse. And frankly, the picture that the reports were painting was, you guys are doing worse than you were the year before, when that's not really reality. The reality is like, you've been patching a lot, but just the volume of vulnerabilities has increased here. So change the direction and viewpoint there.
Sure. Yeah. So how do you see the whole security landscape evolving, or probably becoming a lot more complex nowadays?
It is. I think it's never been more complex, and I think AI has definitely kind of causing that as well, because what I've seen with customers here is that in their conversations, when they're thinking about, I want to do this AI use case, they have data all over the place, right? And we're not even talking about single things like, structured data. We were talking about unstructured data. We have connectors that want to go out and query SaaS apps, right? All these different things, and yet they're starting to become concerned about how much of this exposure of the information, right, I might potentially do that. So we're seeing a big uptick in interest around data security, but also identities to go with all of that, right? Protecting and making sure that the information that's being returned is matched to the identity side of it. People wanting to consider, right, encrypting sensitive information. Organizations that have intellectual property specifically, right, things that they could potentially lose, they want to make sure that, they may not have necessarily implemented those security controls in the past because it's been segmented, right? But now that information could be useful, right? Especially if you're doing things like research, right? You want to be able to open that up to them all, but how do you make sure that it's really not putting your business at risk and giving away your trade secrets?
Yeah, so that reminds me of one organization a few years ago where they had this concern about the data security and how we secure all that, and said everything has to be in their central system. And then they found that some people found it very difficult, particularly those who were reaching out to customers, the customer support teams and all that. So they would have the entire database pretty much, with all the customer details in an Excel sheet on their local systems. So when they did, of course, have somebody who got in and then took some of these things, said, how could it go? We have such a secure system. So when you design systems or when you deploy, how do you address these kinds of things where it's usually the human which is the weakest link?
Sure, and I think that those are very challenging spots, especially when you have disparate systems that are not interconnected, right, or that aren't tied to the one single security tool or platform that can kind of help on that. So we have been doing much more, with data security in the last couple of years, and frankly, we are a big Microsoft shop. So Microsoft's created this kind of great story about how security is weaved into their platform. So, for example, if we were to take Fabric, right, their data platform. Fabric is a combination of both a data platform and analytics platform, say Power BI, that's embedded on that. Now, if you overlay Purview on top of that, and Purview is a very big product. Purview has multiple components, and they've kind of built this and made big investments into it. Last year, the biggest announcement out of Ignite was all of their investments in Purview. Well, what they have is they have the data security and data loss prevention. They have the data governance pieces. So, right, how good is your data quality? Is it meeting your standards? And then they also have other things like insider risk management, which looks at your user behaviors and how people are interacting with all these things, right? Are they doing funny behaviors that could potentially cause your loss? So, that insider risk, what you're kind of identifying here is, someone made a mistake, right? Your insider risk could be something intentional or unintentional, just like what was described, right? And maybe someone accidentally did this, or maybe they intentionally did it because they're exiting the company and they want this information because they think that they own it, right? They've worked really hard in curating it or whatever else, and we see that sometimes as a risk area. But Purview, so you have this information. Basically, you configure how you want to deal with your sensitive information across both unstructured and structured data. Then, basically the same rules that you apply as an organization can be done to that information, right? And you can have that trickle down into your data platform. So now you're securing both from a row level or column level. You could be doing obscurification of different data types, right? Things that might be sensitive for you, PII, whatever else is in there. But those same rules go farther down. If someone clicks, into the Power BI report for that, it adheres to that. Or if Copilot is querying that data platform and pulling that out, it adheres to that. And it applies that sensitivity label directly to that output. So now your output of that prompt is matching what your compliance requirements are. Or another cool thing, export it to Excel. Guess what? It's in Excel. So it automatically applies. Those things are really great. And that frankly helps that entire story, right? You do it once, Now you don't have to worry about all the other things kind of going down through there, and you don't have to worry about that information leaving your org, unencrypted or whatever it is, right? You can apply that directly.
Now, particularly for the multinational enterprises or organizations that are present across multiple countries, there's an increasing demand for keeping the data local. Right? Does that open up more vulnerabilities, or are there ways to handle data that is distributed but all belong to the enterprise? Maybe some of the transactions have to flow across different regions.
I think that's a huge complication, and I don't think we have great solutions yet to help address those, because from a CIO perspective, we like to keep our data as a corporate entity here in the US. And when I'm working with third parties, right, we got to start, you start going through this third party transparency list of who are their cloud providers, where are those locations, right? These data privacy addendums, and it becomes really complicated to track. And sometimes, like, for example, I think that the cloud outages this year have really kind of showcased the interdependencies of how products are built on different workflows, right? Because there's all these third parties in there, like little pieces start breaking, and you're like, well, I thought you guys were only on over here, Google. Well, it turns out you had a small piece of the third party that's tied into that over on AWS. And I'm like, well, you guys didn't disclose that, and is that information here in the US? Well, luckily it is, but the fact that we rely upon others to tell us where this information is going, and we're in this really interdependent world, and I think it's going to be really hard to kind of track where your information is going. We really do need some different technology on that, because these third parties make it really hard. And I think we're kind of leading towards that too, with all these co-pilots and other pieces, which is, you got to understand your data flows to know where things are going, right? And your systems are, just because we have an MCP server over here doesn't mean that that MCP server should be able to touch this data that's in this other geo. So that's certainly complicated, I think.
So there's also a lot of talk about zero trust environments. When you have, it may not be called legacy as such, but probably older applications, how would you kind of bolt on zero trust on them?
Makes it a little harder. There's, I'd say, ways to do compensating controls, things that we can do. So legacy applications, we look at things that proxies, that can be in the middle, right? Something that can modernize the front end authentication, something that we can do conditional access for, right? On every access first, coming back in and having another set of credentials that's not tied into that front, or looking at it from a perspective of, maybe we should just put this application in the segment. We'll open up a virtual desktop to it, and that's the only way that can be accessed, right? So in that instance, for us to be able to kind of allow for that, these legacy systems, we're basically isolating it. We're allowing one specific way in. Maybe those remote desktops don't even start up unless someone's actually accessing. There's always a need to keep things around, especially when you're dealing with anyone that has a financial system or something that's time bound, right? Those systems live on forever and ever, and from a system side, we're always like, when can we get rid of this thing? The more that we can get rid of, the safer we are. But those same concepts for zero trust apply to things that we're doing in like manufacturing and operational technology environments. Right? There's a lot of apps that run in these environments that are operating critical machinery, yet they're designed from 20 years ago, right? They don't support any sort of MFA, they don't support any sort of modern auth, but we have to find really creative ways to try to segment them and allow them to deal with their inputs and outputs And for that, right, we also have to understand our complete data flows. So laying in some technology that can help us visually see where those data flows are going across the network traffic allows us to better segment and do it in a safe manner that's non-disruptive. So the knowledge is key. And so understanding your data flows, I think whether you're an OT or going back to dealing with regulatory locality issues or MCP servers and the future of AI stuff is going to be an essential part of everyone's job.
Yeah, there seem to be so many different moving pieces that move at different speeds, and always the hackers or the threats are also becoming more and more sophisticated. So as a security professional, what gives you sleepless nights?
Oh my gosh, everything about AI. Like I've always thinking, because as a security professional, like innovation, right? If you think about it, the innovation curve, I'm looking at that chart behind you, right, where you got the arrow going up, right? I think of like innovations, that arrow going up, and maybe that bar that's below it is the actual security side, right? Security is trailing innovation, and so we're constantly dealing with how to address the next threat reactively because someone's found this vulnerability or someone's found this new way to do this exploit, or there's new methods and approaches to how you best secure. And like AI, right? Prior to this year, we didn't talk about MCP servers or anything like that. That wasn't even a conversation point. Now we're talking about how do we secure this and how do we put security in line with it. And what's the best way? Is it that we filter everything through a central choke point, or is it better that we layer security inside of each one of these? I don't know. Like the guidance is going to change as we go forward. So my only, I guess, what keeps me up, if I was to summarize it in one thing, is am I missing something that is critical that I need to be able to address in the future, right? And it's not necessarily the reactive risks as much as it is what is it that we're not seeing here that could be a potential risk, or like how do we make sure, like with doing these things that we're doing today with AI, that we're not creating a greater vulnerability that's going to cause a huge impact. Those are all possible, I think. But it shouldn't, like at the same side, I don't want to slow down innovation because we're living at a really cool time. And I don't know if I've, in my 25 years, if I've seen something where we're innovating so fast and like it changes on a weekly basis.
Yeah, so that's probably the other side of the coin. Obviously seem to be enjoying this role. So what gives you the greatest happiness, joy in this role?
Oh, by far, when I see teammates and team members succeed and grow and accomplish some amazing things. I like the people side of it, honestly. Like that piece as a leader and seeing someone kind of mature and really kind of step up and start seeing what they can do and take on new responsibilities and be successful at that gives me immense joy. That makes it for me.
Wonderful. See, we also generally talk about this tussle between the devs and the security people, or when it came to production, the whole DevOps movement and everything else. So when you wear both hats of being a CTO and a CISO, is there any internal conflict, or how do you handle that?
Oh, there most definitely is, because thinking about how we are developing applications and building intellectual property or products, we want to make sure that we have a secure foundation. But most importantly, right, if people aren't, if the value isn't there in the product, right, and we're not shipping that product and getting the latest capabilities or whatever it is, right, then we've missed the mark there. So there has to be a balance. And so what I try to do when we're doing something like this, especially if we're thinking about AI, is making sure that when we do something, we have our minimum foundation of security in that MVP. And then it may not be the final state. I might not be satisfied as a CISO with everything that's there because I know that there's more that we can do. But it's for example, going to be too much of an investment, too much of a time suck, right? We're not going to be able to launch it on time. We got to balance all of those things. So there's a balancing act. So when we get to that point, right, I try to build out a list of these are the essential pieces that we must have. This is like as we start adding more capabilities, we need to start layering in more security in that. So it's definitely a balanced approach. We just can't ship features and we just can't have security, right? We won't have a product then. So it's a little bit of both of those things. And trying to make sure that we're solving that business problem, I think is the key piece, right? Because I can't get security budget if we don't solve the business problem or create revenue. Like that's it.
Again, as a CTO, there's so much of technology choices that we have nowadays. So how do you even find time to keep up to date with all these things and then internalize or be able to apply it in specific contexts?
To keep up with everything, I try my best. I do a lot of reading. I am involved on the Microsoft side at some pretty deep levels. Getting roadmaps, I always try to attend any of like the roadmap sessions that are available to us as a partner. So I do have a little bit of a runway, right? So I'm not just dealing with a reactive announcement. I might hear something in the spring, and then see the final product, for example, at Ignite.
Okay.
I know what's coming. I may not know exactly what it looks like, but we do get some runway on that. But frankly, there's a lot of innovation happening at scale too that's coming out. So lots of conferences. I do a lot of reading. I try to keep up on the latest across the board on there. I could frankly like some of the stuff on security helps me understand where people are deploying stuff too, right? So if we're seeing a lot of conversations around new risks with MCP servers, right, might go focus a little more deeply into what are the different technologies there? How can we secure it better? What are some of the innovative things that are happening there? When I go to like trade shows, I always go talk to the small vendors there. Because those are the guys that are kind of more bleeding edge and thinking about what they're doing next. So like some of the security ones this year, you ended up with a lot of ones that are doing AI security and trying to put something in place around these MCP servers or creating visibility within those, the AI platform, the plugins, or the input-output areas of the apps. So they're trying to surface that telemetry and show what's happening in there, and they all have slightly different approaches. I think it's a fascinating way to learn kind of what's next on the roadmap is just go talk to the small vendors.
What's your perspective on this whole emphasis on security versus people also talk about the hyper-personalization?
So I guess when you're saying hyper-personalization, can you explain a little bit more on that?
Yeah. So people want to make everything very contextual and based on the user, what happens at that time, which means that there is a lot of context information that has to be passing, I don't know how many hands. While doing all that, again, the possibility of either something getting injected or something getting leaked. With all that, everyone says that you will get your custom tailored unique experience, something that knows what you're going to think next to that extent, right?
Yeah, that's interesting. It certainly is a risk area because right now you have to bring in the context of that user. So now you're storing more information about that user. You're having to secure that information. You're then also having to add in more data sources, right? This information may not be in one, right? I don't know if you're pulled from public information or private, but, right? More data flows, where's it going? More opportunity at loss. It's kind of scary. One of the things that I do to keep myself on my toes is on Reddit, there's a SaaS platform forum on there. And you can read all the stories about people vibe coding on there and creating applications. And selling applications to businesses that have compliance obligations, and they think that they've solved this compliance side. Well, all of a sudden they're processing PII, and they realize that their sub processors don't actually have, meet those compliance obligations, right? There is no BAA that can be signed with them or anything for that. So it kind of goes back to our other side, right, of talking about these third parties. We got to really know where that information is going and who's tied in, and if you're going to be touching this information and storing PII, and understand where your users are coming from. What are those local laws, right? In the US, every single state has like a different privacy law, right? If you disclose too much, in New York, you disclose over X amount of records, you have to notify the state, and you have to notify all these people there. So how are you going to do that, right? So not to necessarily slow what you are doing in innovation, but just know your risks and think about it from like where your users are and where your business is. I think, personalization is awesome. I love that fact. I like to get personalized information that's tailored to me, but at the same side, I don't want another public disclosure, although I've completely accepted that all my public information at this point is publicly accessible somewhere, right? It's been leaked at some moment. So it's more about just protecting the financial aspects of that.
Yeah, I had a question on vibe coding since you mentioned that.
Yeah.
Now seeing a lot of vibe coding for quote unquote enterprise applications. Any views on that?
I think it's an area that I would not. I think it's a great benefit, right? I think that there's a lot of these co-pilots out there are getting much better. It can certainly accelerate development time, bring costs down, help everyone do more with less, which is frankly what everyone's striving for here, right? But at the same side, don't short your QA side of things, right? Make sure you're doing solid QA. Make sure that you're always going through a application pen test on there. Make sure you're securing your apps as much as possible when it comes to your identity, and don't skimp on some of those areas. Take some of that benefit of increased productivity and apply it on the security side, because I hear the horror stories out there. There are horror stories. There's lots of vulnerabilities, and I think people need to make sure that they're just putting out good products that are both secure as well as full featured. So take some of those benefits and apply it to your security budget. Would be my recommendation.
What about at least organizations that want to adopt a mix of open source and some other proprietary solutions?
Be aware of the risks. I think that the open source side, right? We hear a lot about the vulnerabilities with the big companies, right? Microsoft or Google or any of the platforms out there. But you keep also hearing about all these repositories in open source that get impacted. The big ones on the npm plugins this past September, that was billions of downloads, right? Potentially injecting right into your application, because you might be unaware that an ability for someone to read the information that's going into your app, and you don't even know it. So be cautious on those things, and certainly make sure that you have a solid SBOM, that you understand what's in it, what are all the dependencies, and put them through some tools out there that can check to make sure those vulnerabilities are being not run at all times, right? Or being able to discover that you need to go back and fix this immediately. I would love to see an update. I actually, that probably makes me want to go back and check to see what the status is of the npm output there. But with billions of downloads, right? What was that true impact on software? I'm sure that there's at least 10,000 vulnerable apps out there that haven't been patched, but maybe millions. I don't know. That's a lot.
Yeah. So based on your experience, what are you heard, seen, what would be a rough thumb rule, kind of a percentage of cost that one would have to budget for securing one's application compared to the overall cost of developing an application?
I think that's a good question. I think if you have a roadmap and you have patterns established, I think that you can do it very effectively, and at low cost. Maybe 5% would be my number. But I think if you don't have those patterns established, and frankly, one of the things that I was most impressed with one of the RSA sessions this year is Microsoft was sharing a lot about patterns and practices that they are sharing with developers as part of their Secure Future initiative. And what they are doing internally is basically they have they call it a paved path, right? This is the Microsoft standard. These are all the tools that go along with it. They're actually sharing it with developers too. That's something you can go out and look at. But it basically says how are you doing identity? How are you doing the foundational pieces to secure your apps, right? What's allowed pattern that's good for your business. And I think once you've established that, and you can address your baseline requirements or your customers' baseline requirements, then you'll be able to do it much faster and at a more effective side. But if you're constantly having to figure this out every single time and you haven't spent the time defining that, I think that your probably spend's going to be at least 10%, maybe even more, 15.
Again, based on all the dynamics in this whole area, what would you say are the pros and cons of an enterprise doing all the security by themselves or working with an organization like ProArch?
Great question. I don't think that any organization, if they're dealing with AI today, should be doing it alone. And the reason being is that we are seeing, there is no expert out there. Everyone's learning. Sure, people have more experience, but there is no expert. And I think trying to do it alone, you could have the best team ever, but you're going to learn something by working with a partner like ProArch. The ability to kind of come in and think that you can address all the security areas or address all the data issues or the governance issues, all of those require a subject matter expert. And frankly, especially you might have that in a larger enterprise, being able to afford a SME in each one of those areas. But when it comes to small enterprises, mid-sized enterprises, they're lacking an expert, right? Whether it's a talent in a specific geo that they're looking at, that they operate in, or working with maybe they had someone walk out the door, right? There's always going to be an expert that you need, and you can be able to do it faster and cheaper once you have the access to those people. So I think that's one of the benefits, I'd say.
Yes, as we are drawing close to the end of our conversation, I'd like to ask you for some career tips for two segments of people. Somebody who's considering a career in IT, for them to choose security. And the other is people who've had some experience who probably want to switch from whatever they're doing into security.
Oh, yes. Awesome. So my career advice, I have one general one I want to add into this as well, which is always say yes. I think that the best way you can gain experience is saying yes, right? And, my personal philosophy is that if I'm going to be given an opportunity, right, I want to try my best to be successful at it. And I've done lots of things that I'm like, I don't think I really want to do this. Like, this requires me to go write 300 pages of an assessment. It sounds terrible, right? But guess what? You do that 5 times and you get pretty good at writing assessments and being able to translate the customer needs into outcomes, right? And I learned a lot from that. I didn't think I'd like it at first, and I didn't. But you know what? I did it. And it wasn't until I finally get to a point where I'm like, hey, I don't want to do this anymore. I want to go do something new, right? It allowed me to then say no and then train my next person for that. So, it's also given me the opportunity to work with so many different things and meet so many different people and really kind of create where I wanted to be as a professional. Because, Shiv, as I think you've noticed, right, there's not many CTOs and CIOs or CISOs together. And right, I see this as a new blended role. This is something that we're going to need more and more when it comes to the AI side, because you're going to need to be able to balance those things. So someone entering security, I would say make sure you go out and start doing some self-study. Find one of those areas that is one of those security domains that is most interesting to you, right? If you are in the, for example, writing in applications, right? Start looking at how do you secure the data in those spaces, or how do I start securing the identities that are logging in, right? Start gaining some knowledge in those spaces and understanding what it is that you can do your job better and start applying that security in your personal life. I think that there's lots of, it's great to go to college and get those things, but the practical applications are really what's going to make the difference for you and being able to apply those in real life. Secondly, make sure you're always vocal about what you're looking for, right? Talk to your manager, tell them you have an interest, see if you can't get some, management buy-in on your next level of education, right? I can tell you if someone at ProArch said, hey, I want to, I'm a developer, I want to learn more about the security side of things, help me align here. We're gonna put some training in front of them that helps them get that education there so they can do that role better, because there's no better employee than one that's really engaged in what they want to do, and one that feels like there's some advancement for them. And then for someone in like entering just general security, I think find some great, like, go to college, get that certification today, but get some hands-on with internships, find some interesting organizations, and do as many as you can. Get some different ones, because if you end up, for example, you might find that you really like compliance, right? If you like order and you like to be able to have very defined lines, and you like to understand how compliance can be maintained, and how do you audit to that level? There's very specific careers on that, right? But go do some of that. Go work with someone that does offensive security, right? That's on the pen testing side. See if that's of interest. Go work on someone that, if you feel like identity could be a niche, go work, find an internship at an identity company. So do a couple different things, right? Don't just settle for broad security. See what's of interest out there, and experiment on that.
So now I have a bonus question based on what you said.
Right.
There's a lot of talk about AI taking away developer jobs. So what is the impact you see of AI on security professionals?
I think that is, we're going to have to get better. I still think that there's a human in the loop piece. We're not at a point where that's a viable option to remove. I do think that there is potentially some impact, right? I think that the fact that if we can do very entry-level jobs with that, so you definitely, as any individual, need to build your AI orchestration skills, and being able to work with generative AI and other AI tools to help control, because I think the next iterative is more humans in the loop there, and you're going to be that person that's orchestrating these AI agents. So having those foundational pieces of not just building AI, but operating AI is certainly going to be key on that front. When it comes to, like, for example, developers too, I think that's a really important piece, is familiarize yourself with the different tools that are out there, right? Go experiment with, of course, in your own test environment, right? Not breaking your organizational, AI governance policies, but go experiment with your own code base over in GitHub Copilot. Go try it out with Claude. See what the options are out there, right? And see which ones really work for you. I think that there's some really cool things of, hey, actually, here's a great one. Don't even use your own code base. Go out to GitHub, find some old legacy code out there, right? That's 20 years old, and go try to modernize that app, right? That with one of these copilots. See how quickly you can do it, right? See if Claude's faster than GitHub Copilot or whatever, right? And see what it takes to transform some legacy code into something new, right? You might create yourself a new job altogether, right? Updating some old stuff in your environment that works now in a much better system, and remove some of those security vulnerabilities that we can't fix.
Yeah, I think that's a really great idea, and I think it will also accelerate the time to learn and then understand how code used to be written as well.
Right, right. Absolutely. I mean, there's a lot of legacy stuff out there. I think it'd be fun experiment. Maybe that's what I'll do this evening.
Yeah, I also have an idea. I also just started playing around with Cursor for a while now. Yeah, this seems to be an interesting project. Yeah.
Yeah, Cursor is great. Everyone. I've heard a lot of talk about Claude in the recent months about how efficient it is. We're also a big GitHub Copilot shop here, but we want to make sure we're using the best and finding what we can do and seeing ways that certain platforms work better with certain things. So you're just got to build out that knowledge.
And it's just a matter of time that they catch up. I mean, each one is kind of improving.
It is, yeah.
Daily.
And the models are going to adjust, and certain things are going to get better, things are going to get worse. I think that's the interesting piece too. Is right the prompt that works today isn't going to work tomorrow for you.
Yeah.
Like, what is this? This doesn't look anything like the output yesterday. What happened? Well, the model changed a little bit. So.
So thanks a lot, Ben, for coming on the show and then sharing your perspectives. And I'm sure this will enthuse at least a few people to get on to consider a security career.
Shiv, thank you so much for having me today. I would also encourage anyone, if they want to reach out, I'm available on LinkedIn under Ben Wilcox, ProArch, or go to proarch.com. We have an active blog section. I'm always adding some content on there too. So thank you so much for having me here.
Yeah, we'll include your contact handles in the show notes for sure. Yeah, thanks once again. Yeah.
Sure.
We thank Siddharth for the music and Anita for promoting the Software People Stories.
If you like this episode,
please subscribe on your favorite podcast client
and spread the word in your network.
If you'd like to share your story,
contact us at podcasts@pm-powerconsulting.com.